I was scrubbing marble floors when I uncovered a family betrayal so dark it nearly killed a billionaire. What looked like quiet family drama was actually a calculated murder plot. They thought I was just a help. They never knew I was hiding a dangerous identity. This isn't just one of those revenge stories. This is revenge and justice, served from inside the family that created the monster. Wiping down the marble counters of the Phillips estate, no one suspected I was actually the estranged granddaughter of the dying billionaire in the master suite. But when I found the empty vials in the trash, I realized my aunts weren't just waiting for him to die. They were killing him. It is a strange feeling to scrub the toilets of a house that should, by rights, be partly yours. But that was the life I had chosen, or rather, the mission I had assigned myself. My name is Lily Phillips. To the staff and the family, I was just Lily, the quiet girl from the agency who kept her head down, polished the silver until it gleamed and never spoke unless spoken to. To the world of academia and medicine, I was Dr. Lillian Phillips, a top-of-her-class graduate specializing in toxicology and internal medicine. But to Arthur Phillips, the patriarch of this dynasty, I was nobody. My mother had been Arthur's favorite daughter, but she had committed the unforgivable sin of falling in love with a poor artist. She was disowned, cast out of the kingdom of Phillips Enterprises, and she died when I was 22, leaving me with nothing but a brilliant mind and a burning curiosity about the grandfather who had let his own child die in poverty. I didn't come here for the money. I came here for answers. I wanted to see the man who had turned his back on us. I wanted to know if he was the monster my mother never truly hated, even at the end. When I heard through the grapevine that Arthur Phillips was terminally ill and bedridden and that the high-turnover household staff needed a new live-in housekeeper, I forged my references, hid my medical license in the bottom of my duffel bag, and took the job. The Phillips estate was a mausoleum of cold luxury. Everything was gold, marble, and velvet, yet the air was thick with the stench of decay and greed. The vultures were already circling. There was my Aunt Victoria, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by plastic surgery she looked perpetually surprised, and my Uncle Charles, a man who sweated gin and desperation. They were Arthur's remaining children, and they were currently residing in the estate, ostensibly to care for their dying father. In reality, they were there to ensure the old man signed the right papers before he kicked the bucket. For the first 2 weeks, I was invisible. I brought fresh linens to the master suite. I vacuumed the heavy Persian rugs. I watched Arthur Phillips wither away. He looked like a ghost. His skin was gray and papery, his breathing shallow and rattling. He spent most of his days in a drug-induced stupor. The family doctor, a man named Dr. Evans, who drove a Porsche that cost more than my medical school tuition, claimed it was end-stage heart failure coupled with rapid-onset dementia. It didn't sit right with me. I would watch Arthur from the doorway while I dusted the bookshelves. I watched the tremors in his hands. I watched the way his eyes darted around the room in moments of clarity, filled with terror, not confusion. That brings me back to the vials. It was a Tuesday. Aunt Victoria had been on a rampage because her mimosa wasn't cold enough. I was taking out the trash from the private study adjoining Arthur's bedroom. It was a room strictly off-limits to the staff, but Charles had spilled brandy in the rug and I was ordered to clean it. In the wastebasket, buried under used tissues and discarded financial documents, I found 3 small glass vials. They were labeled with a prescription for digoxin, a heart medication, but the dates were wrong. I pocketed the vials, my heart hammering against my ribs. Later that night, in the safety of my small servants' quarters in the basement, I examined them. According to the prescription label, these vials should have lasted another week. They were empty. I did the math. If Arthur was being given this dosage, he wasn't being treated for heart failure. He was being overdosed. Digoxin toxicity causes nausea, confusion, irregular heartbeats, and eventually cardiac arrest. It mimics the natural decline of a dying old man perfectly. I sat on my narrow bed, staring at the glass in my hand. The realization washed over me like ice water. They weren't just bad children. They were murderers. They were accelerating his death to get their inheritance before Arthur could change his will or spend any more of their future money. I had a choice. I could go to the police, but who would believe the housekeeper over the powerful Phillips family? The police in this town were on the Phillips payroll. Aunt Victoria would have me arrested for thefts before I could even open my mouth. No, I had to be smarter. I had to be a doctor. The next day, I began Operation Nightingale. Step 1 was reconnaissance. I needed to know exactly what they were giving him and when. I started volunteering for the shifts nobody wanted, the early mornings and the late nights. I made myself indispensable to the private nurse they had hired, a heavy-set woman named Brenda who spent more time on her phone than checking the patient. "I can take the water pitcher up to Mr. Phillips, Brenda," I'd say with a helpful smile. "You finish your coffee." Brenda was lazy. She handed over the access to the room without a second thought. I started observing the administration of the medicine. It was Aunt Victoria who usually insisted on giving Daddy his special medicine in the evenings. She would mix a powder into his applesauce. "Here you go, Daddy," she would coo, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Eat up, it'll help you sleep." I managed to swipe a sample of the powder residue from a dirty spoon one evening. I didn't have a full lab, but I had my kit. I ran a basic chemical test using reagents I'd smuggled in. It wasn't just digoxin. There were traces of heavy sedatives, benzodiazepines. They were keeping him pliable, confused, and slowly stopping his heart. I knew I had to act fast. He didn't have months. He had days. I used my day off to drive 3 towns over. I went to a pharmacy where nobody knew me and bought over-the-counter supplements that looked identical to the pills they were crushing. I also visited a compounding pharmacy and used my credentials, risking everything, to obtain the actual correct dosage of the heart medication Arthur was supposed to be taking, along with a powerful diuretic to help flush the toxins from his system. I returned to the estate with a plan that was as dangerous as it was precise. The switch had to happen in the main medicine cabinet in the hallway, which was locked. But Uncle Charles was careless. He left his keys on the billiard table when he got drunk, which was every night. At 3 a.m., the house was silent. The only sound was the grandfather clock ticking in the foyer. I crept upstairs, my socks sliding silently on the polished wood. I found Charles's keys, unlocked the cabinet, and went to work. I didn't just swap the pills, I had to replicate them. I spent an hour in the laundry room, grinding down the harmless supplements and refilling the capsules Victoria used. I replaced the lethal digoxin with a saline solution in the liquid vials. Then came the hardest part, treating him. I couldn't just stop the poison, I had to nurse him back to health without anyone noticing. I began sneaking into his room at 4 a.m. every morning. The first night I approached his bed, he looked like a corpse. His breathing was ragged. "Mr. Phillips?" I whispered. His eyes fluttered open. They were milky and unfocused. "Margaret?" he rasped. Margaret was my mother's name. My heart clenched. "No, sir," I whispered, checking his pulse. It was thready. "I'm Lily. I'm going to help you." I administered the correct heart medication and the diuretic mixed into a hydration solution I'd prepared. I lifted his head, helping him drink. He swallowed convulsively. "Bitter," he muttered. "It's good for you," I said softly. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I scrubbed floors and took verbal abuse from Victoria, who complained that I missed spots on the windows. By night, I was Dr. Phillips, monitoring my patient's vitals, adjusting his dosage, and flushing the poison from his veins. The change was slow, but undeniable. The gray pallor began to leave Arthur's skin. The tremors subsided, but the most dangerous part was his mind. As the sedatives cleared his system, he started to wake up. One afternoon, I was dusting the heavy curtains in his room. Victoria and Charles were downstairs, arguing with their lawyers about estate taxes. Brenda was in the kitchen eating cake. "You're the girl," a voice said. I froze. I turned around to see Arthur Phillips sitting up in bed, looking at me. His eyes were clear, sharp, blue like mine. "Sir?" I said, gripping my duster. "You're the one who comes in at night," he said. His voice was weak but steady. "You give me the water that tastes like chalk, and since you started doing that, the fog in my head is gone." I stepped closer to the bed. "You need to keep your voice down, sir." He narrowed his eyes. "Who are you? You're not just a maid. I've watched you checking my pulse. You check the pupils of my eyes. You move like a doctor." I hesitated. This was the moment of truth. "I am a doctor," I admitted quietly, "but I can't practice right now. Not here." "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "Everyone else in this house is waiting for me to die. I can hear them, you know. They think I'm deaf or senile. I hear them planning the renovations." "Because you're not dying of natural causes, Mr. Phillips," I said, dropping the bomb. "You're being poisoned." He didn't gasp, he didn't cry out. He just closed his eyes for a long moment, a look of profound sorrow crossing his face. "Victoria and Charles," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you?" He looked at me again. "Why save an old man who has done nothing for you?" I looked at the photo on his nightstand. It was a picture of him and a young girl laughing on a swing set. My mother. "Because everyone deserves a chance to set things right," I said, "and I needed to know if you were worth saving." He followed my gaze to the photo. He looked back at me, studying my face. The realization hit him slowly. He looked at my eyes, then my chin. "Margaret?" he whispered. "Margaret was my mother," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm Lily." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. The billionaire tycoon, the iron-fisted businessman, began to weep silently. "She's gone. I know she's gone. I was too stubborn, too proud." "We don't have time for this right now," I said, my medical training taking over to suppress the emotion. "They are going to realize you aren't getting worse. When they realize the poison isn't working, they will try something drastic. We need a plan." Arthur Phillips wiped his eyes. The frailty vanished, replaced by a glimpse of the titan of industry he used to be. "You're right. You have her fire. What do we do?" "You have to play dead," I said, "or at least dying. You have to be worse than ever. We need them to feel safe. We need them to make a move that we can prove." The next week was an acting masterclass. Arthur slumped in his bed, drooling, muttering nonsense whenever Victoria or Charles entered the room. I watched them with a hawk's eye. They were getting agitated. "He's lingering," Charles complained one evening in the hallway. I was polishing the banister nearby. "The debts are coming due, Victoria. I can't hold off the sharks much longer." "I know," Victoria hissed. "The doctor said his heart should have given out by now. Maybe he built a tolerance." "We need to finish it," Charles said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tonight, the injection, an insulin overdose. It'll look like diabetic shock, untraceable if we cremate him fast." My blood ran cold. This was it. I ran to Arthur's room. "Tonight," I whispered. "They're coming tonight." Arthur nodded grimly. "Is Henderson ready?" I called him, I said. Mr. Henderson was Arthur's old personal attorney, a man Victoria had banned from the house months ago. I had tracked him down and told him everything. "He's bringing the police, but they need to catch them in the act, or at least with the intent." I set up my smartphone, hidden in a flower arrangement on the dresser, pointing directly at the bed. The storm broke around midnight. Thunder shook the house. It was a cliché, but it set the stage for the horror that was about to unfold. At 1 a.m., the door handle turned. I was hiding in the walk-in closet. The door cracked open just a millimeter. Victoria and Charles entered. They looked terrified, but determined. Charles was holding a syringe. "Do it," Victoria whispered. "Just do it, Charles." I can't," Charles stammered. "Give it to me, you coward." Victoria snatched the syringe. She approached the bed. Arthur lay there, eyes closed, breathing shallowly. "Goodbye, Daddy," she sneered. "You really should have died a month ago. You're costing us a fortune." She raised the needle. "Stop!" I screamed, bursting from the closet. Victoria screamed and dropped the syringe. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here?" she shrieked, her eyes wild. "You stupid maid! Get out! Get out or I'll have you killed too!" "I don't think so," I said, standing my ground between her and the bed. "Charles, grab her," Victoria commanded. Charles lunged at me. He was heavy, but he was drunk and slow. I sidestepped him, and he crashed into the nightstand, sending the lamp smashing to the floor. "You're fired," Victoria yelled. "You're done. I'm calling the police." "Please do," a deep voice boomed from the bed. Victoria and Charles froze. They turned slowly to look at the bed. Arthur Phillips sat up. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't slurring. He looked furious. He reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. "Daddy?" Victoria whispered, all the color draining from her face. "You ungrateful, parasitic vultures," Arthur growled. His voice was filled with a power that shook the room. "I gave you everything. Everything. And this is how you repay me?" "Daddy, no, it's not what it looks like." Victoria started backtracking, her hand shaking. "The maid, she was trying to hurt you. We were stopping her." "Save it," I said, walking over to the flower arrangement and pulling out my phone. "I have you on video, Victoria. I have the syringe on the floor, and I have the months of swapped medication in my room as evidence." "Who are you?" Charles gasped from the floor, clutching his bruised shoulder. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. "Gentlemen," he said to the open doorway. The lights in the room flicked on fully. Mr. Henderson walked in, followed by 3 uniformed police officers and a detective. "It's over, Victoria," Mr. Henderson said, holding a thick file. "We have the toxicology reports from the hair samples Lily provided. We have the video feed, and we have the statement of Arthur Phillips, who was very much of sound mind." The arrest was chaotic. Victoria screamed and cursed, blaming Charles. Charles wept and blamed his gambling debts. As they were handcuffed and led away, Victoria stopped in front of me. "You're nothing," she spat at me. "You're just a servant." Arthur stepped forward, shielding me. "She is more of a Phillips than you have ever been," he said coldly. "Officers, get them out of my sight." When the house was finally quiet, the police gone, and the lawyers packing up their briefcases downstairs, Arthur and I sat in the study, the same study where I had found the vials in the trash. He poured 2 glasses of scotch. He handed one to me. "I don't usually drink on the job," I joked weakly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted. "You're not on the job," Arthur said. "You're family." He took a sip and looked at me. "I watched you, before I let them know I was awake. I saw how hard you worked. I saw how you treated the other staff. You have your mother's heart, Lily, and my brains, apparently. A doctor?" "Top of my class," I smiled. "Why didn't you tell me? Why come as a maid?" "Because I didn't want your money," I said honestly. "I wanted to know who you were, and if I had come as your granddaughter, I would have never seen the truth. I would have never seen the vials." Arthur nodded slowly. "I made a terrible mistake with your mother. I let my pride destroy the only real love in my life. I can never fix that, but I can try to make it right with you." The next day, the news broke. The scandal of the Phillips family was on every channel. Billionaire's children arrested for attempted murder. But the real story, the one that shocked the legal world, was the filing of the new will. Arthur Phillips invoked a slayer rule clause, ensuring that Victoria and Charles and their descendants were disinherited completely. They wouldn't see a dime. But he didn't stop there. 3 months later, I walked into the boardroom of Phillips Enterprises. I wasn't wearing my maid's uniform. I was wearing a tailored suit. I sat at the head of the table next to Arthur. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Arthur announced, looking healthier than he had in years. "I would like to introduce you to my new successor. She has a medical degree, a sharp mind, and she is the only person in this room who knows how to clean up a mess." He squeezed my hand. "This is Lily Phillips, and she saved my life." The transition wasn't easy. The world called me the Cinderella heiress, which was annoying, but I ignored the tabloids. I had work to do. I used my inheritance and my position to overhaul the company's pharmaceutical division. We stopped price gouging on life-saving medications. We started funding orphan drug research. I made sure that the Phillips legacy would no longer be about greed, but about healing. As for the estate, I kept it, but I made some changes. I fired the lazy staff, but I kept the brit ones and tripled their salaries. And every Tuesday, I still go down to the kitchen and make a pot of tea, sit with the housekeepers, and we talk. Because I know that the people who clean the floors are the ones who know where the dirt is hidden, and nobody will ever poison a Phillips under my watch again. Sometimes when I'm walking down the grand hallway, I stop and look at the marble counter I used to wipe. It's the same marble, the same house, but the reflection looking back at me isn't a servant anymore. It's the savior of a legacy that was almost lost to the darkness. My aunts and uncles are currently serving 25 years to life. They send letters sometimes, begging for money for the commissary. I send them toothbrushes. After all, hygiene is important. So that's how I went from scrubbing toilets to running a billion-dollar empire. It turns out the best way to clean up a dirty family is with a little bleach, a lot of patience, and a secret medical degree. And to anyone out there who thinks they can underestimate the help, remember, we have keys to every room, and we know exactly what you throw in the trash.